All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's live briefing event, our last in a series of pre-debate events. Today, we're thrilled to discuss how we can reshape American influence at home and abroad in the wake of the Trump administration with some great legislators and leaders. I'm Joel Wenger, the political director for Democratic Majority for Israel. On behalf of our staff, our president, Mark Melman, and our board and board co-chairs, Ann Lewis and Todd Richmond, we welcome you. As this is the final event in this series, I also want to give additional thanks to our political team behind the scenes, Hadar Arazi, Hallie Koch, and Hannah Kosk, as well as our political team, Jake McClory, and our interns in the political department, Sammy Whalen and Meshulam Unger. We hope that you and your loved ones are well and staying healthy. Before I turn it over to Mark Melman, I'm going to go over a couple ground rules. If you like what you're hearing tonight, please check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can sign up for our news and updates on our website, dmfi.org. We'll take questions during this event. And if you want to ask a question, submit it through the Q&A feature on your Zoom interface. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you want to submit a question, you can submit it through the comments box. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Melman, President and CEO of Democratic Majority for Israel.
Thanks very much, Joel. It's great to be with everyone. Thanks again to Congresswoman Houlahan, Chairman Jeffries, as well as to our Senate candidate in South Carolina, Jaime Harrison, will be joining us in just a moment. I'm proud to be the President and CEO of Democratic Majority for Israel, which is an organization that is dedicated to advancing the interests of the Democratic Party and to making sure that that Democratic Party remains a pro-Israel party as it has traditionally been. We've been involved in that work now for going on 2 years. We've had some tremendous successes. We helped make sure that we had a pro-Israel Democratic nominee for the presidency in Joe Biden. We helped make sure that Democratic platforms at the federal level and it's in states across the country reflected the pro-Israel views of the Democratic Party. We were involved in 29 primaries this year where pro-Israel candidates faced candidates who were not pro-Israel. We won 28 of those 29 primaries, a record we're very proud of. And now today, as we move to the general election, we're involved in 100 races for the House of Representatives, 18 races for the Senate, important races that will make the difference in expanding the Democratic majority in the House, taking over the United States Senate, and making sure that we have a pro-Israel Democratic president to replace Donald Trump and Joe Biden. As part of that effort, we are spending significant amounts of money on behalf of these congressional candidates across the country, especially those in tight races. We're spending significant amounts of money on behalf of Joe Biden to make sure that he is elected. But we are being swamped, I must tell you, in a number of places. I'm about to show you an ad that we're doing in Florida, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, targeted at pro-Israel voters in those states. And we're very proud of the ad. It's gotten over 3 million views in these states. Yet, I will have to tell you that the Republican Jewish Coalition is involved in a $10 million effort to make sure that Donald Trump is reelected and that Joe Biden is not. And they are telling pro-Israel voters incorrectly, inaccurately, that Trump is the more pro-Israel candidate, Biden is not. Again, we're battling that, but we are battling it really from a point of view of financial disadvantage. They have an individual, Sheldon Adelson, who's capable of and does turn over tens of millions of dollars to them every year, and that makes a real difference. But here's the ad that we are now on the air with in 3 battleground states targeted at pro-Israel voters. Hallie?
All the change you will hear about, there is one enduring, essential principle that will not change, and that is our commitment to the peace and security of the State of Israel. That is not negotiable. That is not a matter of change. That is something to be reinforced and made clear.
DMF IPAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
With that, let me turn it over to my friend and co-chair, Todd Richmond, who will introduce our guests.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark, and to my co-chair, Ann Lewis, and everybody on the staff. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Todd Richmond, as Mark said, and I'm proud to serve as DMFI's board co-chair. And I'm incredibly proud of all the work that we've done this cycle to help elect pro-Israel Democrats and ensure that the Democratic Party remains strongly pro-Israel. The incredible ad that you just saw that is supporting Vice President Biden is just one of the many efforts that we have led over the last couple of weeks. So please help us keep these efforts going through Election Day and make sure that we can reach as many people as possible by donating today to DMFI PAC at dmfipac.org. We cannot do this critical work without the support of leaders like yourself. So now it is my honor to introduce our guest today for our third and final of our pre-debate panels. Representative Chrissy Houlahan, Chairman Hakeem Jeffries, and Democratic Senate nominee Jaime Harrison. As the first woman ever elected in her congressional district and the first Democrat in 160 years, Congresswoman Houlahan is no stranger of building bold legacies. Her 16 years of military service and following years as an educator and businesswoman have solidified her commitment to public service and, above all, her commitment to American values. Chrissy has fought for those values both at home and abroad throughout her time in Congress, notably through her involvement with the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where she has been a strong voice on the U.S.-Israel relationship. I have known Congressman Jeffries since he was an assemblyman, and I remember vividly campaigning in his district in 2012 when he ran for Congress. He has exemplified public service throughout his time in Congress by building solutions for the communities that raised and elected him. Born in Brooklyn, New York, Jeffries now serves New York's 8th Congressional District in the pursuit of a bold, progressive agenda, especially in the policies that are important to New Yorkers. Congressman Jeffries founded the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Caucus and now serves as the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. He has made a significant impact during his time in Congress by continuously fighting for his progressive values, and he too has played a very important role in strengthening the relationship between our country and Israel. Jaime is a native South Carolinian, almost got that one wrong, sorry Jaime, shaped by the public school system and the strength of his community. Being raised by grandparents and a single mother, he earned a scholarship to Yale University. After college and law school, he returned to teach at his old high school and empower kids to go to college. In 2013, Jaime was elected as the first African-American chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party. Jaime knows the struggle that Americans face in regards to affordable health care, student loan debt, and many more, and will use his time in Congress to fight for all South Carolinians as well as Americans. To all our panelists, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your support of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. Thank you for being amazing Democrats. And we really, truly look forward to the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And a reminder to all of our participants, you can submit questions through the Q&A feature on Zoom. So to start us off tonight, obviously, we're all here because there's a debate coming up in a little over an hour, a little less than an hour. Tonight will be the second time Biden and Trump face off in a debate. What, if anything, do you think will be different about this debate? Congressman Jeffries, we'll go to you first.
I was hoping you were going to go to Jaime Harrison first on that question, but it's great to be with Chrissy and Jaime, and certainly Todd, Joel, Mark, and DMFI. I think that the president appears to be heading into the debate, at least with his advisors suggesting to him that he tamp down the interruptions and appear more presidential. Now, they've been trying to get him to be more presidential for the last 4 years, and it hasn't worked. And so we'll see. Now, he is facing a lot of electoral peril at this moment inside of 2 weeks, and perhaps may be incentivized to try to conduct himself with a greater degree of decorum. But it is my hope that we don't grade him on the Trump curve, because what often happens is that when there's some semi-normalcy to the manner in which he conducts himself, he's given rave reviews because he's being graded against prior outrageous behavior. And it's going to be hard to top in terms of outrageousness what he did during the first debate. And so it's just my hope that when people evaluate his performance, we evaluate it on the issues, the pandemic response, what's his plan for moving America forward. We haven't heard a vision or a second term agenda. I think for Joe Biden, the key is just really going to be to continue to exercise restraint, which I often have said is the most underrated quality in politics, restraint, because you only generally see the downside of the lack of restraint, but people aren't often credited with the upside. But I think Joe Biden has been tremendously restrained throughout this entire process in the face of great provocation, including personal attacks that are unwarranted against his family and his son. And I think we're likely to continue to see a tremendous level of decency and restraint from Joe Biden.
Definitely. Thank you, Congressman. And since he called you out, Jamie, we'll go to you next.
Well, listen, I agree with the Congressman. First of all, it's good to see all of you. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. And I agree with the chairman wholeheartedly. I think the American people are hungry for decency again. They are hungry for leaders that are hopeful, leaders that are going to bring us all together as a nation. And I think you're seeing that not only on the presidential level, but I think you're seeing it all across the country. People are tired of being torn apart. Anxiety right now in this nation is at an all-time high, not only because of the political situation that we're in, but the fact that we are dealing with a pandemic that is wrecking the lives of so many folks, not only economically, but their health. Many of us now know someone who has passed away because of the coronavirus. Just this summer, my grandaunt Gladys passed away alone in a nursing home. And that's hard. That is so hard for so many of us to have to deal with, that you can't be with a loved one in their greatest time of need, that you can't hold their hand, that you can't pray with them and tell them that everything's going to be okay. Or the fact that you have parents right now here in South Carolina that are on the verge of losing their home because they can't make ends meet. They're still laid off. And the federal benefit that they were enjoying, they no longer enjoy because the ineffectiveness of Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and others in the United States Senate. That's hard. And right now, I think the nation just needs someone to almost virtually hold their hand and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. And this is the path forward. And I think if Joe Biden can do that in this presidential election, turn off the volume on Donald Trump, almost ignore that he is even on the stage, and just speak directly to the people of this great nation, I think he'll win in a cakewalk. He will become the next president of the United States, because that is what the nation is hungry for right now. I don't think Donald Trump has the capacity to feed that hunger. And so, but I know Joe Biden does. And I think he just needs to step up and give that to the American people.
Definitely. Congresswoman Houlahan?
It's really hard to follow you two. You've done such a beautiful job of framing the evening, the debate, and it's nice to be with all of you. I come to you from, ground zero, so to speak, the Keystone State, just outside of Philadelphia, the suburbs that everybody's talking about, that everybody was talking about in 2016 as well. And I think what's striking to me in this conversation is that no matter where you sit, whether you're in the South or the North or the Mid-Atlantic or the West or the Midwest, we're having the same conversation. And that conversation has to do with these buzzwords, right? These civility and decency. We in the collar counties of Philadelphia, the kind of soccer mom, for lack of a better descriptor, we're exhausted too. We have been hunkered down in our houses largely since March. That, not to mention the 3 years prior to that, where we were just accosted on the daily with all kinds of nonsense coming from the very person who should be leading with civility and decency, and who should be teaching our children what it means to be a leader and to be a representative. And instead, we've got, chaos. And I think what a good looking debate would be coming from Vice President Biden would just be maintaining control over the chaos, and showing us that there is the path forward that includes us being able to come together and heal as a nation rather than continuing to be divided. And I also speak to you from a military perspective. I served, as you mentioned, my dad, my grandfather. I have several cousins who are active duty to this moment. And we're looking for a leader who doesn't malign our men and women in uniform, which should honestly not be a conversation, but we apparently need to have that. But we should also be looking for a leader who understands, who is empathic, who understands the ethos of country over party, of, self last, country over self. And that is definitely embodied in the lifelong service of Vice President Biden. And definitely in stark contrast to the person who is currently in that office, who has maligned pretty much everybody who's worn a uniform at one point or the other. So what I think we're looking for is that. I think we're also looking for, and I'll conclude with this, an agenda that's about not just those who are already successful. And I speak to you from the wealthiest county in Pennsylvania. We get it. We're okay, or many of us are, but everybody's not okay. And unless we're all okay, unless all the babies are okay, we're not okay as a nation. And so I think that we're also looking for somebody who recognizes that we are interconnected in a way that we could perhaps not have appreciated before pandemic, but we now understand. My health matters to yours, my education matters to yours, our nation matters to the world. So I think that that's what we're looking for in a future president.
Thank you. Chairman Jeffries, we'll go back to you with the next question. As chair of the House Democratic Caucus, what relationships, both domestic and international, are the most important for us to rebuild in the wake of Trump to help protect all Americans?
Well, the president has done a great deal of damage across the world to America's standing as the leader of the free world. And so I think in terms of reorienting our approach, that's first and foremost, continuing to elevate our values in a way that give us the opportunity to make the world the best, safest, most democratic that it can possibly be. Now that means continuity of our strong existing relationships, certainly the U.S.-Israel relationship being incredibly important in that regard based on our shared, values and the shared strategic concerns that we have in the Middle East, and that's going to be important. And we know, as I think Mark articulated, Joe Biden is committed to maintaining that as robustly as possible, and we look forward to his presidency in that regard. But then you've got frayed relationships with the European Union, frayed relationships with NATO, frayed relationships with our traditional allies in the West, Great Britain and Germany and France, and even, a frayed relationship with Canada to our immediate north. And so those will be incredibly important to focus on and rebuild. And lastly, I think many of us, certainly within the Congressional Black Caucus, are hopeful that the new administration will turn an eye toward Africa and the Caribbean, which we believe have almost uniformly been neglected by this administration from a policy standpoint, unlike the previous Republican president, George W. Bush, whose work on dealing with AIDS in Africa was groundbreaking and historic.
Thank you. Congressman Houlahan, we'll go to you next. Your father, as we know, was a survivor of the Holocaust. So in one generation, your family has gone from Holocaust survivor to member of Congress. Can you share a little bit about that story and how it inspired you to run for Congress and push back on the Trump administration?
Sure, and it's a pretty overwhelming story, and I just was struck by your question, and which, I've told the story before, but I'm sitting, a couple yards away from the conversation that I had with my dad at that time. My dad was born in 1942. He was born in what is now Ukraine, what was Poland. And his entire family, with the exception of his mom and grandmother, were murdered during the war. And I'm grateful for the fact that a Christian family took my dad in as a 1-year-old. My grandmother, his mom, left him literally at the door of a church in Warsaw, hoping that somebody would take care of him. And he did survive under the care of this amazing family. And he was brought here by his mom and his grandmother as a refugee, and I'm struck by the parallels with this administration and separating children from families and that kind of thing. But what's important to this story, to my story, is that in the days and weeks after the election, my dad sat in our living room over here, and he was weeping about his concern for the nation that had given him so much, his concern that we would once again be building out basements and hiding people. And that's pretty striking, because my dad is not just a little boy, who was a refugee here, but he also served more than 30 years in the Navy. And he's a strong man. And to see your dad, in tears, worried about our nation, was definitely the call to action, one of the many call to actions that I heard, begging me in my being to raise my hand and be part of the answer. So I hope that I've done him a service. I know I was really struck by the fact that one generation later, from destitution, I was able to sit on the floor of the House of Representatives for the State of the Union, which is pretty remarkable. But we've just got so much work to do to make sure that we don't repeat the horrors that existed when my dad was a little baby. And that's part of why I'm here.
Thank you. Jaime, Harrison Helps is an organization you started to help South Carolinians and inspire community service, regardless of political party. What lessons are you hoping that this teaches Americans everywhere?
Yeah, Harrison Helps is, in essence, is like having a nonprofit built inside of our campaign. We have, since I launched this campaign, we've been out into the community addressing the needs that people have on a day-to-day basis. We've worked with the Boys and Girls Club, Habitat with Humanity. We've worked with the Ronald McDonald House, a lot of local nonprofits, domestic abuse shelters. We just recently, about a month and a half ago, had a school supplies drive for parents and students who were impacted by COVID, students whose parents lost their jobs. We raised $15,000. We gave out over 850 backpacks to those students and their families. I think the most powerful way that we can persuade people is to show them and not tell them. As a party in Democrats, we do a good job of talking about our values, but sometimes we don't do the best job of showing those values to people. And so therefore, people get a little jaded sometimes. And I believe that it's important that public servants actually go out and serve the public. And they don't do it just by enacting legislation, but they actually roll up their sleeves and go into the communities, talk with folks, and figure out ways that we can improve their lives. And so what I've learned is that people want that. People want to be able to see their elected officials. And even I'm not an elected official. I'm a candidate. But I think it has rebuilt trust that was once lost between the people that we serve and the folks who want to serve the people. And so, one of the things I encourage Democrats to do in particular is to have service be a part of how they go out and campaign. Have it be a part of how we legislate, but how we lead. and there are a lot of people will definitely appreciate it. And I think you will build much more stronger bonds within our community if folks actually saw us out in the community rolling up our sleeves to help folks in all ways that we possibly can.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Congresswoman Houlahan, we'll go back to you for this next one. President Trump has literally formed close relationships with authoritarian leaders such as Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. What message does this send to American allies if Biden is to be elected? How should Democrats approach relationships with those leaders? I think you, sorry,
sorry, I muted myself because I was coughing. I have few words for that question. You know, it's stunning that we're even having a conversation about our commander-in-chief and his relationships with really unseemly characters across the world. I am a veteran of the Cold War. I actually, even though I'm a freshman, my active duty service was before the wall fell down. And so I'm, as we just talked about, the daughter of somebody who survived the Holocaust, I am incredibly leery of people who are authoritarian, and I'm incredibly alarmed by our commander-in-chief, who seems to be allying himself with these unseemly characters. And so we do have an enormous amount of work to do to try and walk back what has been 3 or 4 years of really dangerous behavior and willingness to kind of embrace bad actors. And so we have, I think that one of the things that I've been struck by, I just got off of a Zoom call with Secretary Madeleine Albright, and she was talking about a phrase that I want to make sure that I remember. So I've written it down. Vice President Biden's platform is to make sure that we serve with the power of our example, not the example of our power. And I think that what we've seen in this president's instincts are exactly the opposite, which is, you know, kind of grandstanding and the bellicose, conversations and being loosely friends with people who we should have nothing to do with is very, very alarming. So I'm looking forward to rebuilding that. We're looking forward to rebuilding our alliances and to rebuilding the world that we recognize. We are stronger, certainly, with our allies than without them. And also getting back to kind of the individual level at the United States. I'm also looking forward to building back the trust that we have as a people in our own democracy. Because I think that that's been incredibly undermined in the last several years. And so we have our own housekeeping and work to do as well.
Jamie, let's be honest, not long ago, nobody really thought that you had a chance to win this race, and now it's as close can be. You know, what do you think you did, and what did Lindsey Graham do that changed the landscape so dramatically over the course of this election cycle?
See, Joel, I just got to teach y'all more about the South. Because listen, I would not have gotten into this race if I didn't think there was a pathway for me to win. And there are so many paths to win. And one of the things that I think is really, really important is that for the Democratic Party, and I've been pushing the party on this, is that we don't cede any territory or any ground anywhere. And you think about the way the Republicans look at it. You know, right now, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont, three of the bluest states in the country. And what do they also have in common? Republican governors. Now, if the Republicans looked at the world in the way that Democrats like to, well, you know, it's a blue state, and I don't know if we can win, then they would not have Republican governors right now. What we have to do is we have to find good candidates that reflect the values of the people in those states. We got to run them. We have to help them with the resources, and we got to make sure that we've invested in the infrastructure in those states in order to compete. Luckily, I was the chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party for a few years, so I got an opportunity to really understand South Carolina and where Lindsey Graham was. This is a guy who I used to respect. That many people used to respect, because we thought, even though we disagreed with Lindsey on issue after issue, We thought that he could rise above the political fray and do what was in the best interest of the nation. But what we have come to see is that this is a guy who is just hungry for political power and political relevancy. And you know, the folks in South Carolina be damned, because they are secondary to Lindsey being for Lindsey and Lindsey getting more power. And you know, just remembering that old adage from Tip O'Neill that all politics are local, that's still true. It still rings true in these communities. If you haven't done a town hall in 3 years, but I can turn on my TV and see you every other night next to Sean Hannity, that says that you value that rather than you value being home in the state. If you don't come home to visit one of the 4 communities that have lost their rural hospitals, but every time I hear or read, you're on a golf course at, you know, one of the Trump golf courses, 27 of them you visited over the course of the last few years, it says to me that you don't care that my rural hospital closes because you're too busy golfing with the president. And so what I have done in this race is focus like a laser on the issues that are important to the people here in South Carolina. The fact that 38% of our communities don't have broadband, and we're in the midst of a pandemic that's forcing people to work from home and educate their kids from home. The fact that 250,000 of our folks don't have health care because Republicans like Lindsey have refused to expand Medicaid. That 14 out of our 46 counties, there are no OBGYNs in the entire county, right? Like that, our infrastructure is falling apart. So I'm talking about the issues that people really care about, and Lindsey's golfing with the president. And that is why this race is as close as it is, because people want somebody that's going to fight for them and make their communities better. And right now we have a senator who cares about being almost the senator from Washington, D.C. instead of being the senator of South Carolina.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Chairman Jeffries, we're going to go to you with a question from one of our participants, Rafi. How will the Democratic Caucus strengthen relations between the Arab nations and Israel? You know, in recent weeks, we've seen agreements between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, and the negotiations with Lebanon. You know, how will this allow us to both take advantage of these opportunities while continuing to combat Iran and terrorism they sponsor throughout the Middle East?
Well, Rafi, thank you for that question. And I think there's great interest and great enthusiasm and excitement around what we've seen over the last few months in terms of Israel strengthening its ties with the Gulf states. On the several trips that I've taken to Israel and met with, you know, both sides in terms of the political divide in Israel, they would all make it clear that they contemplated strengthened relationships with the Gulf states and could see a pathway there. And what's exciting about that is that it perhaps may ultimately provide a foundation for getting to a robust, lasting, you know, two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel, of course, living alongside a demilitarized Palestinian state with the democratic aspirations of the Palestinian people being uplifted. And that perhaps, you know, a pathway there relates to this increasing alliance between Israel and the Gulf states, and that also can serve as a counterweight to the Iranian menace, which of course remains the most significant threat in that region to Israel and to the Gulf states in their views and American interests. And so, you know, I know that this is an area of great interest with the potential incoming administration, and I think they'll find an alignment of values with the House Democratic Caucus.
Definitely. Congresswoman Houlahan, we've got a question for you from Joseph. With Chairman Engel leaving, what are the prospects for maintaining the strong pro-Israel posture and activities of the House Foreign Affairs Committee?
That's a really, really good and important question. This was also a conversation that I had about an hour ago. I want to make sure, and whomever is this successor to Chairman Engel, that we maintain, honestly, the heritage of the Foreign Affairs Committees and being bipartisan and being strongly pro-Israel. And that is certainly amongst my thought processes while I help to choose who the next chair will be of the committee. And it is, 5 or 6 months away, but something that I've taken very, very seriously in terms of making sure to thoughtfully interview the folks who are considering being elevated to that responsibility. I think it's also really, really important in a hopeful scenario where we have a Biden presidency and as well a Senate that is democratically controlled and a House that hopefully maintains and builds on its majority, that we also make sure that we maintain the bipartisan nature of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the presentation of the Foreign Affairs Committee to our allies and foes as being unified, at the water's edge, so to speak, kind of conversations. Because I think one of the things that's most destructive about this administration, and it of course has implications to Israel, but at the world at large, is whiplash. We don't know where you stand on one issue or another. Is this going to be dependent on the administration, or is it going to be something that's consistent and reliable that's coming from, the nation, the United States? And that's one of the things that I think is most important in my decision, and I think the decision of the House in terms of who will succeed Chairman Engels. He will be very, very missed. He definitely has been somebody who has guided me in the last first year and a half of my existence in Congress. And so I very much appreciate the question, and I know we're taking it very seriously.
Thank you. We'll go to Jaime with this next question. This question comes from Logan. Her question is, as we are here for Gamify, how do you handle the purity tests around the subject of Israel that many progressives seem to be trying to implement within the Democratic Party?
Yeah. Well, I've been very clear that I have always been and will continue to be a good friend of Israel. When I was a congressional staffer, I got an opportunity to visit Israel, and it was an amazing experience for me. It sort of brought it into reality, right? All of the things that I've always read, and as a religious and very spiritual person, it was almost like a religious awakening for me to be there. And so I'm going to continue to be a strong advocate for Israel and the friendship and the partnership that America and Israel has had. And so, working for Congressman Jim Clyburn, we often, and working with Steny Hoyer, as we know, who led delegations of members to Israel every year, I'm going to continue that tradition of our leadership of the past in the House Democratic Caucus and the current leadership, what Hakeem has been doing, what Congresswoman Houlahan has been doing, to make sure that we strengthen that relationship. It's not about the personalities that are involved, because we all have colorful personalities in our leadership, but it's about maintaining that strong relationship between the two nations, because not only we have common values, but also I think for the national security of both countries, it is in our best interest to maintain those strong relationships. And so I'll continue that effort and continue that process when I'm in the United States Senate.
Our apologies, I was still muted. We've got another question from another one of our participants. The question comes from Rick, and we'll take this one to Chairman Jeffries. Should the U.S. do more to address anti-Israel bias at the UN?
Well, certainly I think that the U.S. can do more and should do more to deal with, the hostility that Israel often confronts at the UN. Traditionally, it's played that role. I think we need to continue to do so. I think as a House Democratic Caucus, we've been on record and made clear, even with respect to, the efforts of some here in the country to promote things like BDS, that we were going to take a decisive position against it, as we did with the anti-BDS resolution that passed the floor in substantial fashion last July. And I think heading into a new administration, we're likely to see that leadership role at the UN And I think it's all anchored in the principle, as I've often observed, that we've got to look at things through the perspective of, it's not a relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. It's not a relationship between Joe Biden and Benny Gantz. It's not, a relationship between the Republicans and Likud or the Democrats and blue and white. It's a relationship between the United States and Israel, of course, anchored in shared values and strategic interests. And as long as we maintain that perspective, you'll see the type of continuity and elevation of the U.S.-Israel relationship that I think is in the best interests of both countries.
Awesome. This next question will go to everybody, but we'll start with Congresswoman Houlahan. As a result of Trump's reckless decision to withdraw from the JCPOA without a plan to get a better agreement from the Iranians, and they've broken through the caps and taken actions in direct violations of the agreement, the U.S. has not lived up to its commitments, and some core provisions start to sunset within just another year or two. Just getting back into the JCPOA seems a very difficult, practical matter. What should be done to ensure we have a lasting agreement that prevents Iran from developing nuclear weapons?
Yeah, and also a complicated question. And this administration has definitely done a number of very damaging moves to really undermine and question our international standing in this issue, the JCPOA, and a number of other issues, as you can appreciate, in terms of treaties or agreements that we have entered into in previous administrations that we have then walked back, which goes back to the conversation that I was just having about the importance of having a less mercurial presentation of our foreign affairs agenda and rebuilding the JCPOA or the conversations around it will be very, very hard. And I'm heartened that Vice President Biden and his team have a lot of national security experience. In fact, it's one of the things that I was most attracted to when I first supported the vice president in his bid to run prior to Iowa, actually, was that we would be better served by somebody who had a really long and storied history on the global stage and a really deep bench of people who could address these issues, because it's going to take a lot of work to figure out how to rebuild our relationships. We, as the chairman mentioned, need to make sure that we're attentive to the fact that Iran is a really bad actor. I think that is one thing that we can all definitely agree on, certainly within the nuclear realm. And we need to, as recently as this week, be very, very alarmed by their interference in our elections, not to mention all of the other kinds of horribleness that they create in the region itself. So I think it gets back to our alliances. We need to make sure that we're getting back into the posture that we've had historically with people who are friends and allies of ours. And the world is definitely in a different place than we were 3 or 4 years ago. So I'll be interested to see how the Biden administration navigates the waters back into or concerning JCPOA and all of the other things that we've kind of walked ourselves away from as well.
Definitely. Chairman Jeffries, I know you have to leave in just a couple minutes, so we'll go to you next with this question.
Well, I think Congresswoman Houlahan laid it out as eloquently as she always does and thoughtfully. And it's just been a great honor to participate in this discussion with Jaime, who, everybody in Brooklyn is rooting for you, Jaime. And,
here in Philly too.
And you've done such an extraordinary job, and just so proud of you. And but with respect to Iran, obviously the commitment is going to be to ensure that Iran under this regime or any regime never becomes nuclear capable. And I know that commitment is shared to the highest degree by Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and whatever administration he puts into place. And as Chrissy indicated, we can feel confident that they will have a degree of foreign policy expertise, perhaps unmatched in modern American history. And that the House Democratic majority and the Senate majority that Jaime Harrison is going to help deliver, along with some others, are going to be in lockstep in ensuring that Iran will never be able to threaten in a nuclear way, certainly our friends and allies in the Middle East, Israel, the Gulf states, and of course, our allies throughout the world, and of course here in the United States of America. And that'll be a high priority for us, to work through, but driven by the fact that that is the guiding principle. We want longevity in whatever agreement emerges, and that we've got to negotiate from strength. That involves, of course, the notion and principle that all options have to remain on the table, but diplomacy is the driving force. And the more we can partner with other friends and allies throughout the world to maximize the pressure on Iran, the better the outcome will likely be. So thank you, Joel. And, it was an honor just to really serve as the warm-up act for Chrissy and Jaime.
No, I'm sure that we're the warm-up act for the debate.
Take care. Stay safe, everybody.
Take care.
Congressman.
All right, Jaime, we'll go to you with that question.
Yeah, well, this is what I would say, Joel, because I think the Congresswoman and the Chairman laid out a lot of the details on this. But, the way that I look at foreign policy is that I don't think it is as complex and complicated as we sometimes make it out to be. It's sort of like how we teach our kids in terms of how they should interact with each other on the playground or just in general. That the problem that we are going to have with the JCPOA or whatever the next version of the JCPOA is, because we need to forge a new agreement, or even things like another climate accord. The hard problem that we're going to have is we have to rebuild trust that has been lost over the past few years. And in order to do that, there are two steps that we're going to have to do. Or things to demonstrate it. Again, using that show not tell approach. Folks will want to know that we can keep our promises, and that's going to be really important. And then our friends are going to want to know that we can stand by them. That's also going to be really important in order to rebuild the trust. I mean, when we stepped out of the JCPOA, we in essence left our friends with the bag and said, okay, it's on you. You do whatever. When we stepped out of the Paris Climate Accord, I mean, it's again, folks who counted on us for our leadership, and then in that important moment, we step off of the stage and say, "Okay, we're done. We'll leave you all to clean up the mess." That's not good in terms of then wanting folks down the road to stand with us in real moments of crisis. And so we're going to have a lot of cleanup to do for the lack of a vision, the lack of a approach in these past 4 years. We're going to fundamentally have to rebuild trust of allies and friends who will want to join us in yet another initiative or another agreement. And we're going to have to demonstrate to them before they get in that we will keep our promise and that we won't walk away from it again. And so that's going to take a lot of time and energy, and we're going to need some of the best diplomatic minds and folks with the best diplomatic skills to really rebuild relationships that are really that have been shattered over the past few years.
Definitely. We want to squeeze in one final question for both of you. We're going to go back to domestic policy briefly. What should be the top domestic priority of the next Congress to begin to rebuild the trust with the American people? I know it's not an easy one, and I know it's not fair to go to either one of you first, but for Congressman Houlahan.
That's a hell of a question. Totally unfair, out of bounds. What I would say is I'm gonna do what I've learned in the last year and a half, which is answer the question I'd like to be asked. What I would say is there's a lot that needs to be done right away on, day one through 100. And I kind of loosely call it the no duh agenda. Mm-hmm. That's healthcare. We started talking about that. People are really struggling with health care and health issues. That's the number 1, 2, and 3 issue that I think in our community and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the country we are struggling with. So we have a commitment to address that issue and to make it affordable and accessible to people. Jobs, particularly in this economic environment with the pandemic, making sure that we treat one another with dignity, equal pay for equal work, minimum wage issues, trying to provide a pathway so that everybody is safe and secure in this economy. I was spending my time in education before this, making sure that we have the skills that we need to be able to evolve into this economy. I think we have not been very good at. And then safety, right? Planet safety, gun safety, the safety of our communities. So I know that that's a very broad and expansive, day one agenda, but that's like no duh. All of us should be working on that, or we are not worth, being your representatives. And so I think that's what I hope we do. And then the last thing I didn't add, which is HR 1, which is what we voted on very first in my, not first, but that was, the signature piece of legislation, is bringing back the trust of the people into our government and making sure that access to the ballot, is, not something we have to talk about. We are just a news piece just surfaced right before this. We're in Philadelphia. The Republican Party is video recording people as they drop off their ballots in Philadelphia, making sure that money in politics is, addressed, making sure that we have ethical representatives in our government. Like, these are all no duh things. And so it's hard for me to pick one of them, but that's what I think should be our priority. And then civility and decency would be really nice too.
So Jamie, I know she said a lot of different things. Is there something you want to add on? Is there something you want to echo?
I got it all.
Oh, well, yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, I really do think first thing first, dealing with the coronavirus. And, the fact that it's been 7 months since the Senate has really acted and not responded adequately to the HEROES Act. And folks desperately need those resources right now. The folks who are unemployed, who have lost their jobs, what will happen to healthcare given the Supreme Court decision that will take place on November 10th. These are going to be really crucial issues. We have a high eviction rate here in South Carolina right now, some of the highest eviction rates in the country. And we really have to figure out how we address the ramifications of the coronavirus, how we save some of these small businesses and open up streams of capital for them to reopen. I think that's going to be important. One of my personal priorities, and I'm a big supporter of HR 1. I want to see the John Lewis Voting Rights Act up. I want to increase penalties for those I want to put some secretaries of state into jail for actively suppressing the vote. I really do I want a few of them to be examples that we do not put barriers in front of folks exercising their God-given rights to vote in this country. But I also, here in South Carolina, I want to rebuild and revitalize rural communities. I believe that many rural communities sort of get left out of the equation. And many times Democrats don't talk about rural America. But this Democrat who grew up in rural America, I call myself a dirt road Democrat. And for those who grew up on a dirt road, they know what I'm talking about. But it's time that we invest and rebuild those communities that desperately need the help right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Congressman Houlahan. Thank you to Chairman Jeffries, who I believe a couple minutes ago. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. We're grateful for you taking the time to do this. We know, especially this close to the election, there are a lot of different priorities for your time. I'm going to bring on our board member, Anton Gunn, to say a few final words. Anton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for everyone. My name is Anton Gunn, and I'm proud to serve on DMFI's board of directors. I want to thank all of our panelists for the great discussion and the conversation, and I thank all of you for joining us for your questions and participating tonight. As you heard from Mark Millman at the top of the call, DMFI is the only organization fighting to ensure that the Democratic Party remains strong and pro-Israel. But we cannot do this without the support from people like you who care about these issues as well. So if you care about the challenges that are before us that we talked about tonight and achieving those goals, then please join us in this work. And while you're already in front of a screen, I want you to go to dmfi.org, dmfi.org, sign up for more information, get invitations to our other programs that we do throughout the year, and make a contribution, because we can't do this without contributions. If you want to learn more about DMFI and how you can get involved, you can also reach out to us through the website, or you can send us a note at info@dmfi.org. So I want to thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you soon at an event around the corner. And everybody, remember to vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Congresswoman Houlahan. Jaime, thank you so much. Best of luck to everyone. And do vote.